Welcome to Midlife Women Entrepreneurs, where you'll find real stories, practical strategies, and the mindset shifts you need for entrepreneurship. If you've ever felt like midlife was too late to launch a business, write a book, or chase a dream, think again. I'm Lynette Turner, your host, and I'm bringing you inspiring conversations and practical tips to help nudge you forward and keep growing in midlife. So let's jump in. Well, welcome, Rita Lussier, to Midlife Women Entrepreneurs. I am super excited to have you here today. We met through the podcast, which seems to be a common thing these days, which is wonderful. And when you and I jumped on a pre-call, I definitely thought, oh my God, my audience is going to love you. You've got a great story, great backstory, but you've also written a book. Give yourself a bit of an introduction, and then we're going to get right into it.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting me here. This is exciting. And I think probably the best way to introduce myself is probably through my book. And now back to me, Stories from an Empty Nest, because that's a great lead into my background, which is I'm a writer and I'm a mother. And the book brings together both parts of my life, the professional and the personal. And so just a little background, when my youngest daughter left for college for the first time, I found myself surprisingly, it really caught me by surprise, lost and confused. Like my sense of purpose was not there anymore. And so what was not surprising though, was that I started to lean heavily into my writing. I had been a columnist for the Providence Journal for a dozen years, and writing was one of the ways that I still do process my thoughts and feelings. The other one was running. So very quickly after my daughter left, I had a whole new schedule for myself, which was push yourself out the door first thing in the morning. You're going to go for a run, and then you come in, brew a little coffee, sit at your desk and write. So many mornings, many miles, many pages later, I thought, hey, I might have a book here. And I did, which is how I've come here with you, Lynette, to talk about it.
Thanks for that background and that introduction. And when we got on our pre-call, I just love the name of it. And now back to me, because I think that women, especially 50 plus, we grew up where most of us were giving, and not really receiving in a lot of way. I mean, yes, we were receiving through some of the things that we were accomplishing through our life, but sometimes I feel like we can be a little bit sort of focused more on others than ourselves. And now back to me is such a great name for it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the empty nest piece of it. A lot of times the empty nest can be considered, where kids are leaving. And that was sort of the impetus of your writing. But what you realized is that it's just not a singular event. So take us through a little bit of that thinking.
Well, that was one of the big surprises of the empty nest, besides the fact of how lost I felt, was that every other conceivable midlife change seemed to be rushing at me. For instance, I guess one of the things that I hadn't anticipated, why, I don't know, but how awkward it would be with my husband. We had spent over 2 decades in a house full of kids and everything focused on the kids. And sure, we got away, on a Saturday night for dinner or something like that. But to spend day in, day out, morning, noon, night together, that was giant transition. And I write about that in the book, and some of it's pretty funny. And then the other thing, again, I should have really anticipated this, but I did not because I was so focused on my daughter leaving, I think, is that my parents were getting older. My mother was starting to suffer from Alzheimer's and needed a lot more help, and my father needed help taking care of my mother. And so suddenly, my caregiving went from my children to my parents in a heartbeat. My column for the Providence Journal that I had mentioned came to an end the summer before my daughter left for college because everything has to happen at once. So then I found myself in a position of reinventing my career.
From all the times I've interviewed women on this podcast, there is a moment where there is an event that changes who we are, changes our identity. It doesn't matter what event it is. In midlife, you are going to have an identity shift of some sort, and it's likely a loss. So that's why I like when you said that it wasn't just an empty nest of the kids. It's more about I think I'll paraphrase a bit, but like, who am I now? Right.
Yes.
And you're kind of figuring that out. Let's dive a little bit into that identity loss. What would you say to somebody if they said to you, Rita, I don't really know who I am without blank, without my previous career, without my now ex-husband, or perhaps there was a death, or, my kids at home. What would you say to them?
I would just say the thing that has helped me so much is this idea of being patient with yourself. These are major transitions. I am now becoming a advocate for the empty nest being a major transition in life. I don't think that we pay enough attention to it. I actually think there's kind of like a misperception about it. And I used to think that way, that if you struggle in the empty nest, that you perhaps are too focused on your family. In fact, you may not have anything else that's interesting in your life. You may not have a business or a career or a fascinating hobby. And so I know when it happened to me and I was so devastated, I thought, I can't reach out for help. I mean, I must have done something wrong. And yet, I mean, one of my book events, this woman said this thing that really came singing at me. She said, well, look at what we do for people who retire from their careers. And she said, there's a party, there's a trophy or a plaque or something. It's a big, big deal. And then we check in on him or her and say, how are you doing now that you're not going to work? But none of that happens that I'm aware of with mothers in particular that have spent a lot of years and effort and energy taking care of their families.
As a mother, and who is now an empty nester and has been for a while, I feel like sometimes I poured my whole life into raising
Yeah.
them. And honestly, in some sort of weird way, I feel like I'm now the one left behind, sort of picking up my own pieces. So do you ever hear that in your book readings? What are people asking you about when you're doing these readings? You said that you get a lot of questions from both women and men.
Yeah, I found some people have come with my book to the readings and they have papers in the book at different sections because it's bringing up all this stuff that even if they had began their emptiness years ago, they never really processed the feelings. And it's almost like they're coming to a therapy session, although I'm certainly not a therapist. But I think it's just logical. If you just spent 20 plus years of your life doing one thing and really focused on the kids, how can you not? And all of a sudden they're gone and your house is different and everything's quiet is a good word for it. How can you not find yourself kind of, rudderless is a good way to say it, I think.
Yeah. And I feel a little bit lost. Like, I feel like all of a sudden I woke up one day and I think, oh my God, like what just happened? Do you think that people are saying to themselves, like, somewhere I disappeared? Like, I used to be this way and now I'm this way. Maybe I don't have the same amount of confidence. Is it too late, do you think, to find yourself
God, no. I
again?
don't so at all. I think there's lots of things. Again, that whole idea of patience, but you're going to have to be uncomfortable for a while. I think you just have to recognize that and say, it's going to feel weird. And then you're going to have to try some things, new things, open up to new experiences, new friends, new work, whatever it is that you feel, attracted to, new people, and see if that works. But there's so much more coming ahead, and you're going to be so much more independent and energetic to take that on. So I think it's a
Yeah.
great time of life. You just have to get through that sticky part.
So how did you, like like you said, you built your whole identity around your kids and this busy house and being useful to other people. But how did you learn to become valuable to yourself, I guess?
There were lots of ways. It's all in the book. But, one thing, I think you have to reacquaint yourself with the fact that you're valuable. And there are lots of ways to do this. But one way that I found particularly helpful was to indulge yourself once in a while. And one chapter I told about this crazy idea, at least it seemed crazy at the time, that came into my head to drive 30 miles out of the way to go to my favorite hair salon just to get a blow dry. And I'll tell you, I spent most of the morning trying to talk myself out of it, saying that's ridiculous. You have stuff to do. You can't do that. It's extravagant. And I just pushed myself out the door and I went, and it was just wonderful. It was, I have a great relationship with one of the stylists there, and we were joking and having a great time. And I just felt so nourished and nurtured. And I kind of realized I've been doing that for everyone else. And now I can do it for myself. And I try to remember that, I think you just need to do that for yourself.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that you didn't use the word self-care. It's like more indulge. It feels extravagant, but you just did something for yourself that you probably would have done for somebody else years
I would
ago,
have.
you know?
Yeah, I definitely would have.
So walk us through the format of the book. You told me that you didn't really have to read it chapter by chapter, that there was a lot of really good, helpful tips and information.
So let me just take you a step back to my column at the Providence Journal. So I had 800 words to work with pretty much every week. So I learned very quickly that, I had to tell a story succinctly. I had to make every word count. And, the beginning, middle, end had to fit in that space. So it's not surprising to me that when I started doing this writing for my therapy in the empty nest, that it came out story by story. So like there would be a story about our dog aging and all the feelings we had about that. Or there would be a story, like a hilarious one about my husband and I trying to relate to each other again. So him coming to my yoga class and competing with the guys in the class that were actual dancers. It was like pretty funny. So the stories, each chapter, there's 40 chapters, is a story in and of itself. So you could read like chapter 5 or chapter 9 or chapter 19 and just read that one thing and get something out of it. But when you string them all together, it's a memoir of this time in my life. So it's great for how busy we are, that people can't always sit down and read an entire book. So if you sat down and read a chapter, you'd get something out of it. And then whenever you return to it, you'd get something out of the next one.
Exactly. So, okay, I'm going to ask the elephant in the room question.
Okay.
So what happened when you and your husband all of a sudden woke up to this empty nest and you realized, oh my God, who is this
Yeah.
person sitting across from me? So what was the conversation like, and how did you kind of ebb and flow through that?
Okay. So I remember so vividly, we dropped our daughter off in New York at school earlier in the week, and it was Friday evening, and I had a yoga class that evening, and my husband offered to drive me, and then he picked me up, and I got in the car, and he looked over at me and he said, "So, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you want to do?" And then he said, "Well, we should do something. Don't you think we should?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, we should." So we had this very ridiculous conversation for like an hour. We're driving around Newport, Rhode Island in circles, with our conversation going in circles about what we needed to do something because, hey, we're alone, but we had no idea. So that was the awkward, uncomfortable part. And we ended up that night going, our neighbor had a restaurant and we went there and we sat at the bar and got takeout so we could get home to our dog. But, we had a nice glass of wine. We talked to some people that were at the bar, and it ended up being a nice time. But when we were driving back, we started to talk about, this is going to be a challenge, this whole new thing. But, we were really lucky. We communicated very well and we made it through. And we actually now love having the freedoms.
Are you guys doing hobbies together? Like, is he a regular yoga goer now,
Oh,
or
no.
no?
No, 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 no. Just, I think our big connection is we both are writers. So we
Mhm.
share a lot about our writing, but also we've always, always been able to talk. We talk
Right.
about everything. So here's an interesting little story about my title. So when I got a publisher, She Writes Press, it was like a couple months into it and she loved the book and everything. But then she sent me this email. The title is out. We're not going to have that title. And so, of course, I argued, but she said it's too focused. You need something focused on the reader. And so I came up with alternative titles, none of which I loved as much as this one. And, she came up with a bunch and, we were going back and forth. And then I got this email and it says, so the women in the art department here who happen to be empty nesters, they love your title.
Oh,
So you can have it back. I was so happy because it
amazing.
just kind of encapsulates the feeling of that time. Like in the first chapter, I write about when I found out I was pregnant for the first time. And I wrote that, up until that point, my life had pretty much been about me. And in that moment, almost nothing was. It all changed. And I think your children leaving kind of brings it back to you and maybe reconnecting with yourself and what your motives are and what kinds of things you want to accomplish while you're here.
Exactly. So how did you reinvent yourself? And was it a noticeable enough reinvention, I guess, for your kids to recognize? You have a daughter, but you also have
A
a
son.
child from, yeah, a son. So do they notice a difference?
I think definitely they do. I think especially through this book process to see me, I mean, the book has been amazing. The spirit of that being an author and talking to people and interviewing people and everything like that. I think they're happy for me actually.
Yeah. And so do you feel like you're leaving a legacy behind for them?
I hope so. I mean,
Yeah.
I hope this is a legacy for my family. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about writing a memoir is that it is the story of your family as
Mm.
much as it is the story of me.
Yeah. So what are sort of the key elements of the book that you can share with the audience to pique some interest?
I think it was just like I said, everything came at me so fast. So you'll see in the stories, there's the beginning where I'm lost and confused. And then there's all these things coming at me. And I think you find yourself in the things that come at you. Like I mentioned, spending more time with my parents. I have a great chapter in there that I love because it makes me so happy. But when I was trying to find the answer to how do you become a couple again, I thought, well, I'll go visit the ultimate couple. My parents at that point had been married, I don't know, like 60 years. So I thought anybody that stays together 60 years must know something. So I went to their house and it was like on a Sunday morning or a weekend morning. And I just remember coming up, I hear Beethoven like so loudly in the driveway. I'm like, what is going on in there? So they were having this breakfast together and they had Beethoven playing in the den and they're in the kitchen and they welcomed me in. And so I kind of interviewed them that morning about marriage and learned a few things that I think would be very helpful for anyone. I know they were for me. So,
Right.
but that kind of thing, like it was a time of discovery for me, but
Yeah.
I was discovering through where all these different things that were coming at me, what I was going to do. And, it was shaping me about my career too. I did all
Mm.
sorts of wandering, trying stuff. My best friend took me to a workshop where there was a horse in a barn. I was like, what? It's freezing in here. What are we doing? But, just through that, each episode, each chapter is part of that searching and trying this on and that doesn't work, or this feels interesting. I'm going to keep going this way. So it was great time.
Yeah. And I love what you were just saying there because I think sometimes we feel like we have to have it all figured out, especially like in our 50s. I should know what I like to do. I should know what sort of lights me up. But, that reinvention process, whether you make it a big thing or a little thing, you can still feel a sense of, oh my God, what happens if I try it and I fail? So was there ever a moment that you thought, no one's going to read this book?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, that's always the thing writing is such a vulnerable thing. Writing a memoir is super vulnerable. Even today I go out and I'm at, a bookstore or library or they're, asking to read something or discuss something and I don't know. I'm like, this little doubt and fear comes up in me like, what if people start to heckle me? Like But you just go and you figure whatever is going to happen, happens. One person that I interviewed in my column days was Robert Ballard, the guy who discovered the Titanic. His story was he had many missions before he ever found that ship. And, a lot of different sponsors got mad at him and everything. So he taught me this. I'll never forget. He said, failure is tuition. That he said, go out and fail and you'll find stuff in the failure that will lead to your success. So I try to remember that. It's hard, but you're not going to hit a home run all the time.
So did you ever find something then that you said, like, what was your tuition? What's been your tuition over the years?
Well, I would say being a mother is tuition because, as you don't, sometimes the same thing that worked with the same kid one day, the very next day backfires and it doesn't work
Yeah.
at all. So that is certainly, all the tuition you need for, you've already had it if you've been a parent. But, it's the same with writing, the same with, being a great daughter, just trying your best. That's all you can do. You don't always hit it right away.
So a big part of your promotion for the book has been that you have been going out doing these readings and you get a lot of really great questions. I can imagine there's this sense of community that happens when you are at these readings. Tell us a little bit about what are people curious about when they're in that reading and they're, like you said, they've earmarked certain pages in the book. I've got a question about this. But what are you sort of seeing as a common theme?
I have been surprised over and over again by all the different things that people are picking up from the book. And I guess that makes sense because whatever relates to them, probably not surprisingly, but when I launched the book in our hometown, one of our neighbors she has twins that are going to be leaving for college this September, and she came to the event. And she was brave enough to get up, raise her hand, and read a little section from the book about, I'm not going to remember the exact words, but how is it that I'm here running in the same neighborhood, running past the same houses, the same recycling bins, but nothing is the same? And she said, those are the same roads. And she just started crying. It was really poignant. So that was one thing. But then there's other people that relate to the things I wrote about our dog. There's people that really, really relate to having a mother with Alzheimer's, just elderly parents and how your role reverses with them and they are no longer taking care of you, but you're taking care of them. Or one of the things that was, again, funny now in hindsight, but so if your kids go to college, which mine both did, and I guess it might be the same for other things, but they come back. So here you are, just having all these uncomfortable, tearful mornings, days, whatever. And then it's winter break and they're back in the house for like a month. And so for me, what happened was I was like, yay, wow, I know what to do. I know how to feel. I feel great. I can cook this. We can go here. Everything just kind of falls into place. And then they leave again. And then you're back into the quiet, unknown space, the great big empty, and you got to start finding your way again. And then they come back and it's summer vacation. So that was something that was pretty commonly shared. And then there were those people that would say, so Rita, how do you get them to leave?
Finally leave forever to go out on their own.
Yeah, I want my nest to be empty. And so I don't know what to expect, but I can tell you that it is definitely, the book is a catalyst for a lot of thought, a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions that people have in every which way.
And I still come back to the name, right? And now back to me. It's not just an empty nester thing, even though that is a very strong thread throughout for you. But I feel like when we get into midlife, and maybe I don't have kids, but there is something that is shifting. And I don't know if it's the soul that's finally talking to you saying, okay, it's time to do what you were meant to do. How can you listen? And did you listen to those, that your subconscious mind or that feeling that you needed to kind of do a reinvention, regardless, even if it was your kids leaving or not.
Yes, definitely. And especially in terms of my career, I was searching, wandering. I mean, I would say, I'm going to get a job in Washington to my husband. And he was like, what? And I said, yeah, I just want to be down there. There's a lot going on. I could write about it. And he said, well, how's that going to work? And I'm like, I'm just going to go down there. I'll come back on weekends sometimes. Like that's how lost I was. And it came and there is a chapter where it all kind of came together to me what I should be doing. And it involved having a dream about it. But my auntie Gert was telling me, she said, if you want to be a writer, you just got to sit down and write.
Yeah. And, actually that makes me think, like, I love that. I love that, your subconscious mind came in your dream and it was your aunt that, sort of, hey, hello, wake up. How do I know? Like, I feel like we all have a story in us. Let's just put it that way. But I'm going to turn that thing to me. So I feel like I have a story. I feel like I have a million stories. And where do you begin when it comes to writing a memoir? Would you have any advice there? Like, would you say, time frame it, like time wrap it here? Or would you say pull things like it sort of sounds like you pulled from various different places in your life and wrote it in the memoir. What would you recommend for that?
If you feel compelled to write about your life, I would just give yourself a certain time frame every day that you're going to sit down and do it, and don't judge. Don't try to pre-plan like, oh, it's got to be from when I was 17 or it's got to be from when I was 50 to 53. Just go do it and see what comes up, and just give yourself some months probably to start accumulating material, and then you're going to see something emerge and you're going to know. But you just have to go sit in the process, I think. I mean, I was writing and writing and writing, and I had no idea that it was about the empty nest. I had no idea.
Right.
It was just, this is how I feel today, you know, like,
Yeah.
and a lot of it obviously never made the book, but a lot of it did.
That's interesting because what I'm hearing you say is like, tell your story with intention, just write it. Don't have any sort of preconceived outcome or planned outcome. A lot of people would say, well, if you are going to write a book, you should create this outline, but you just started to write. At one point, how many words roughly did you have where you started to maybe look at it now and go, okay, like I've got over 10,000 words here or 20,000 words here of just a bunch of download. And now how do I start to formulate it into a story?
Yeah. So for me, I think it was kind of unusual because, like I said, I was writing in like I was writing columns. So I would
Right.
just get going on like one episode of something that happened with my daughter, and I would just write that, and I would keep writing, 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 writing. And then that would be like one little story. And then, the next thing would be something that happened when I went out with some of my friends, and it was, my friend Kathy's birthday, and it was freezing out. And I was like, why are we even going out? It's January. And then in the end, she says this thing that was so poignant about this time of our lives. We don't know how many birthdays we're going to have.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, Kathy, you just gave us a gift. And so I wrote about that. So it was like,
Yeah.
because I think of my past, that's how I was writing. I was writing all these individual stories about things that were happening in that time zone. And then eventually I thought, I should put these together. I know there are people, and that goes with fiction too, that plot, and maybe that's a good idea. I don't know. But it just seems to me, especially in the memoir category, to just let yourself go. Because
Yeah.
chances are there's something inside of you that is making you feel like you want to write a memoir, but you may not even know what that is. So
Right.
if you try to plot and outline and everything, you're probably going to squash it down instead of
Yeah.
letting it come out.
Yeah, the message will get lost for sure. And I think there's this thing too where if you don't have this sort of outcome, I mean, I think storytelling, what gets you involved in a book, right? Because you told it in a way that was vulnerable, in a way that I could probably find myself in that story as well. And one thing you said about, you're chatting with your friend there and it became a chapter is how come we don't talk about this stuff as much as we probably should be in our 50s? Like, it's only when I have had bad days where I'll share it with a friend and they'll be like, "Oh, girl, me too. Like I was there." And what? You never told me once that that was happening. Or then there's this sort of genuine connection that gets strengthened and deepened in that. And sometimes I think some of my friends I'm losing, others I'm gaining, but gaining at a much deeper level. So what would you say to encourage that conversation? Why don't we talk about those things?
I don't know, but it's essential. I'm seeing that like in my book events that some of these women and men, their kids have been off for quite a long time and they're crying or they're taking notes or whatever because it's all coming up for them
Mhm.
now because it's been opened up. It's like a wound or something that they just covered up and bandaged and just tried to ignore. But now that, their feelings about it, they're happy to talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I think if somebody's not approaching you with the conversation, you should approach them with the conversation. I think it's just a better way of creating this connection in a world that can feel a little bit big and we can feel a little bit lost and we can feel a little bit alone, a lot of the times.
yeah,
Rita, what's next for you?
sure. I'm just enjoying this time, and there's so much more coming up with my book. I had no idea, but coming up, it's empty nest season. So I have a
Oh,
lot of events
that's right.
because of, I guess,
College and
school situation, people going back to school or going to college or whatever. So I've got a lot of events booked, and people are asking me, so what's your next book about? I'm like, don't know, but
yeah,
maybe there will be one. We'll see.
maybe there will be. Rita, where do people find you?
So the best place to find me is my website. It's Rita Lussier. So that's LUSSIER.com. And there you can find lots of stuff where my events are, information about my background, and where to buy the book. And you can contact me through there too.
Awesome. Well, I unfortunately didn't get the book in time before this interview, which I feel terrible about. I apologize for that. Snail mail, sometimes things get a little lost, but I can't wait to get it in my mailbox because I
Yeah.
am going to read it. I, in fact, was telling a few people about it because I was so excited after our pre-call because I think your book is just so needed and so relevant and timely and, in a time when we, as mentioned, we don't really talk about it, but we should be talking about it. So,
Well,
Rita, thank you.
It was really fun. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Hey, it's Lynette. Thanks for listening today. Please like and subscribe. And if there's somebody out there that you think could benefit from the episode, give it a share. Midlife is your time, so go get it.